Hello and welcome to the Inside Risk and Compliance podcast. I'm your host, Adam Spencer, Director of AJ Fox Compliance, a specialist recruitment agency focusing on all things law firm risk and compliance. I have seen so many people carve amazing and fulfilling careers in this space, and it really has been a pleasure speaking to people who enjoy doing what they do every day. However, one thing that has really stood out to me is how hard it can be for people to access the bigger picture outside of their team, outside of their firm. We created this podcast to share with you some of the insights, experiences and stories of the most interesting people succeeding inside risk and compliance. Today I am joined by Amy Bell, founder of Teal Compliance. Amy is also the chair of the Law Society's Money Laundering Task Force, and you can find her speaking at all sorts of events. More than anything, Amy is just an incredibly charismatic and passionate champion of law firm risk and compliance. And I'm really excited to have her on our podcast today. In this episode, we cover topics including how to build a compliance framework that really works, why controls are so important, and how culture can make or break a firm's compliance, as well as much, much more. Hope you enjoy. So Amy, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm really great, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here. So hopefully, most of the audience should know who you are. If they've spent any time in the world of risk and compliance online anywhere, I'm sure they will have come across you and your business. But for those that might have been living under a rock, do you want to give a little bit of a background as to who you are and what you do? Because I know you worked in private practice originally before you found yourself working in the world of law firm risk and compliance.
Yeah, I did. I'm a solicitor. I have, I've been a solicitor since 1999, so since the last century.
Don't say that.
It's true.
Makes it sound weird, doesn't it?
And when I started off in training in a small high street law firm, then went to quite a big national firm, 5 years there in the personal injury department. Car accidents. There's only 4 ways to have a whiplash injury, you know.
Oh, really?
So after 4 years, I was a bit bored. I took a sideways move in that firm to be legal skills trainer. Essentially, my boss, who was head of operations, was doing all the induction training and the refresher training and needed an extra pair of hands. So that was a job I applied for. It was only part-time and I needed a full-time job. So they also gave me AML compliance, and this is kind of at the very early stage of us trying to navigate AML, 2004, 2005. And the firm had put processes in place, but they needed someone to manage it.
Yep.
And so I think I probably started one of the first centralised CDD teams ever in the UK, in legal anyway. I'm sure banks had them before we did. But we had kind of 700 staff, 300 lawyers, and having it all done by secretaries and trying to help them was quite a big ask. So I created the first team and kind of AML took over. Still did the teaching. I was the head of learning and development as well, so I was responsible for all the firm's training. So a really kind of strange mix between compliance and having to be a subject matter expert on AML, and then thinking about what are the other skills that the business needs to really thrive. And I think that has really served me well, because when I think about risk and compliance, I'm thinking about both of those things at the same time, not just the technical knowledge, but actually what skills you need to be able to do the job and how do we help people get that. So I was there, for 7 years, I think. In 2012, I had a baby, thought I'm going to do something different, and went to join Quality Solicitors, the network. So Quality Solicitors essentially is a marketing company supporting law firms and focusing particularly on the kind of small high street firms. And that's something, having trained there, I really felt passionately about. Because at the time, ABSs were coming in, and having moved from a small firm to a large firm, I realised the difference in opportunity that you could get in a big firm, marketing departments and website and things like that. And then in the small firms, trying to figure out how to do your letterhead yourself while you're doing everything else. So QS's kind of original plan was to be able to support those smaller law firms to thrive. It still is their plan, actually. And I really enjoyed working there for about 4 years. I was looking for something different and went back into a law firm for a little while. Lovely law firm. But I just realised really quickly that I had enjoyed the out and about and the variety of helping people, the consultancy stuff I've been doing at Quality Solicitors. So, made the jump and started on my own.
How was that? Was there something that triggered that jump?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that I had been used to in the firm that I was, and quality solicitors, I was on the management team, used to influencing, making big decisions. And it's quite difficult in a law firm to access those high roles. And risk and compliance doesn't always make it all the way to the board table. In terms of being the risk and compliance professional, there's probably a partner who's a sponsor for it, Culp or whoever, but being head of risk and compliance, you're not necessarily at that level. And that's where I felt I could add the most value, really. And so, started on my own. The idea was just to do kind of 3 days a week.
Live the dream.
That lifestyle business dream that people who start businesses think of. I also own another company, which is a tech company. And the plan was always to do some compliance, pay the bills, and then see what we could fix with our tech company. After 6 months, though, my business partner in the tech company said, Amy, you've not spent any time at all doing any tech stuff. You've just been doing compliance. So that's really, she and I then thought we're going to have to build a bigger boat. And that's where Teal came from. And it's teal because it's my favourite colour. If you ever see me, I've got teal somewhere about my person.
You've got teal on now, haven't you? Yeah.
All over the show. All over the show. And that's where it came from. It's a great CDD question, actually. Where did the name of your company come from?
Is it?
Yeah, because baddies don't have a good answer for that. Oh, they just use an algorithm on Company's House.
Oh, you're joking.
When they're creating the company,
that's
where you've got these strange names in Company's House. So it's a great CDD question. Teal was born. It was me and my husband, and we had some freelancers working with us, and did that for a little while. And then we kind of really thought the work was coming in, and we thought actually we might be onto something here, and decided to kind of create a bigger business than that. Take on employees, and now I think we're up to 16 people.
Amazing.
In 5.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're saying a lot of clients you're working with at the moment?
Yeah, we probably have between 400 or 500 clients a year.
Wow.
For a variety of kind of one-off bits of work. It could just be a helpline call, all the way to outsource. So we have some clients that just outsource all of their compliance to us, and we become their compliance partners.
Fantastic.
It's really gone from things I couldn't even conceive at the very beginning, and now we're a tech company. Obviously I had a tech company to start with, but which kind of got me thinking about process and how could we manage it better. We just went in a load of directions that I wasn't expecting.
Well, that's amazing. That's a fantastic journey as well. You sound like you're skyrocketing, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. One of the things we were talking about before was compliance programs and how a lot of them don't work. And you've obviously dealt with so many firms, so many different law firms around their compliance programs. You must have seen it all, what works well, what doesn't work at all. Why do so many compliance programs not work, and what can firms do to fix it without giving away all the Teal Compliance secrets?
Well, you can read my book that's coming out soon.
Okay, fantastic. Plug, here we go.
Quick plug. I haven't finished writing it, so nobody be rushing to Waterstones for it. It'll be ages. But you're completely right. One of the things that I did, probably, I would say 2019, is sit down and really think about why I kept hearing the same things from my clients, the same challenges. I think, you could kind of, if I said to you, what problems do you think people have, in compliance in law firms? You'll think, oh, they haven't got enough time. They don't know the rules. They don't know what they're supposed to do. And they're all valid kind of problems. It's not the number one, though. The number one problem they've got is, despite the time, effort, resources they're putting into it, they're still not sure it's working. They're still not confident it's working. In fact, they're actually worried it's not.
Right.
One managing partner said to me once, the problem is, Amy, I tell them what to do and they just ignore me. And that's why it doesn't work. Is that people aren't engaged with what they're doing. And there's a load of reasons for that. I developed a model called Compliance That Works. Because nobody wants to write a book about Amy who wrote the book about compliance that doesn't work. So that's why it's called Compliance That Works. But essentially what I kind of identified was that there is a process to it. There's a way that you can build a compliance program to stack the odds in your favour that it will work. And the kind of first bit of that is making sure everybody knows what they're expected to do. They've got clarity on what it is, but not just that. The firms risk appetite. A lot of the times when I see compliance programs not working, is a disconnect between what the compliance people want to do and what the business wants to do. If you've ever heard that compliance computer says no kind of thing, or the business prevention team, that's all about compliance people not necessarily being aligned with the business or the business not appreciating the risks. I mean, you can argue all day long why it is, but essentially there's every person, every organisation is going to have a risk appetite, and it's on a continuum. It's, there's a range, and if you don't get that working right and get clear on that at the beginning, you're going to have problems. Then you've got capacity to do it, resourcing, which I've never met a law firm yet who says they've got enough resources for compliance, and that is a challenge, getting the buy-in from the business to commit those resources. The way in which we communicate about compliance within the business, people are asked to read, 70-page policies that they're, not relevant to them, or attend training that's formulaic and just generic and probably not even relevant to their area of practice. It's not really a surprise that people are kind of turned off by it. And so, you need to have training that's effective. It has a purpose behind it, right? People, I think one of the things that we should be super clear on is compliance is just about a framework to protect people. That's all it is, and deliver a great service. But often it gets equated with a tick box I have to do to say I've done it. And that drives the wrong behaviour, and it drives the wrong attitude, and people lose the purpose. But when you can engage people in the purpose of compliance, they get super excited about why they're doing it and what they're doing it for. So that's communication. Then you need commitment. And this is a tiny step, but actually the most important one, because most of the time we will take asking someone to read a policy. When you start a new job, here's all the policies, you've got to read them, you've got to say you've read them, and we know nobody's actually reading them all. Because they'd be asleep on the desk if they were, right? But nevertheless, we build a policy that says, or a process that says, we're going to make sure that we've done our bit to train you by making you read the policy. It's just not respecting that person's time, especially if it's 50, 60 pages. And the other thing is that we don't necessarily get a commitment from them. If they've not read it, then don't know what they're expected to do. And so we never get that commitment from them to do what we've asked them to do. So it's a tiny little step, just saying, do you understand what I've asked you to do, and do you agree to do it? Here's a great thing about lawyers. We don't break promises. We might tell white lies. If there's any regulators listening, nobody does that. Nobody tells lies. Right, but you just have to walk around an office any day. And any office is not specific to the legal sector, but you'll hear things like, tell them I'm on the phone when they're not. Tell them I'm waiting to hear from such and such. When you haven't, you suddenly send the email off. That, as I was growing up in the law, and when I talk to lawyers about it, they all know what I'm talking about. There's kind of this culture of white lies. So, someone's like, you follow the CDD, and then you'll hear things like, oh, I couldn't get that information from them because. And it's because they don't understand why they're supposed to do it, or they're not committed to it. So just by asking, do you commit? It means that the lawyers make a promise, and they won't break the promise because of undertaking such a fundamental principle for lawyers. Commitment is the fourth one. The fifth one's consistency, checking it's working. We often put policies and procedures in place and hope they work. We very rarely have controls. And this is where we, I think, are differentiated from financial services. So people who work in compliance financial services, very used to having what's called control frameworks. I remember there was a job I was in, which is how we first met, because you were recruiting my replacement back in the day. And a job that I had there was I was working at QS, but QS was owned by a group. And I also had another role within the wider group. And part of that work was that they were doing work for a bank. And so the compliance requirements there were completely different than anything I'd ever come across in the law firm. And this notion of control frameworks, somebody said, well, I want to see your control frameworks by Friday. I'm like, okay, what are them then? I'm like, quick Google, what's a control framework? What might I have to have? And suddenly realised that in financial services, they don't just have policies and procedures, but they check if they're working. And in the legal sector, we're quite far away from that, actually. Definitely. We've got policies and procedures, but we're not in the habit of making sure that they're working.
Why do you think we are? so behind?
I think it's partly because of the consequences. I mean, this is a big part of consistency. There are very few consequences of non-compliance within the legal sector unless the regulator finds out. You know, when I'm auditing, I will often say, have you ever disciplined anyone for failing to comply with your policies and procedures? And I'm like, no. And you look at a policy, you know, failing to follow this policy will lead to potentially disciplinary consequences. And I go, well, what are they then? And no one's ever used them. No one's ever tried to figure it out. I mean, not no one. People do dismiss people for dishonesty and things like that. But when you know that, you know, if you're looking at your CDD records, you're talking to the CDD team or any the wider compliance team, you know, the Lexel auditors, the Lexel people, sponsors within the business. Everybody knows, like file reviews in Lexel is a really great example. Whenever I'm teaching about Lexel, I'll be like, now listen, guys, file reviewing. And everyone looks at me and rolls their eyes. Now, I know that you do it the week before the assessor comes in, but that's not the point. You're supposed to be doing them consistently through the year.
Yeah.
And we know that doesn't happen. The business gets in the way. The clients need servicing. Someone's been off on sick. We've had loads of work in. There's always a reason it's not done. People aren't just deliberately non-compliant. But the fact is the purpose of having Lexel is to keep the thing high quality all the time. And if you just do it the week before the assessor's coming in, which is the control, the assessor's the control, and you get good for that, you're actually not necessarily managing the risk as you should be all the time. So yeah, consistency. We do have non-compliance in all kinds of areas for all kinds of reasons, but we rarely call it out, and that leads to the sixth bit of the model, which is culture. And if you've ever seen, I have a diagram on my LinkedIn about it, and it's got a load of cogs on it. Because essentially, a compliance program's a machine. You've got to follow all those steps, but underneath it all, you need to have the culture that supports it. And this is kind of the $64,000 question: how do you get a culture that supports compliance? It's tricky. It's not what I do. I will be honest about it. I'll call it out and I'll tell you why it's not working. So things that we will often see, sadly, are the reasons I get those lawyers saying to me, oh, despite me putting them on training and telling them what to do, they're still not doing it. It's the culture. It's the inability to have difficult conversations, to challenge behaviour. I wonder whether, I think it probably is, exacerbated by the partnership model that a lot of firms work in, because that makes having those conversations even harder. If I challenge them today, when I need them to vote for something for me in a year, they won't do, because it won't be my friend anymore. And, you know, I don't want anyone to think I'm being flippant about the challenges of running a law firm, especially the smaller law firms, which don't have a kind of management structure that you might see in limited companies, for example. Smaller law firms, we've got people who became lawyers because they wanted to deliver legal services. They wanted to help people to solve their legal problems, and they've suddenly got all these other jobs that nobody really explained properly that they were going to get. Business managers, people managers, business development people. So it's a real struggle to get it right. And to build that culture. One of the things that we've started talking about quite a lot, and we'll be doing a lot more of this soon, actually, is what are the tools that we need to give people. So as I said before, that kind of interplay that I've got between compliance and the wider learning development. What learning development do people need to be able to have those tricky conversations, to challenge behaviour when people aren't following the compliance programme? Around difficult conversation, I very rarely work with a firm and don't recommend difficult conversations, if I'm honest, because we'll often come up against one. I'll be like, how, when have you had training on this? Has anyone ever helped you be able to challenge this? Also, creating an environment where it's okay to get things wrong.
Yes, so important, isn't it?
Which is a tough one. It is a tough one. In my own career, you know, I suffered from working in environments where it wasn't okay to get things wrong, and that drives all kinds of behaviour.
I mean, the thing is, it's regardless of whether it's okay or not, it will happen anyway. So you have to create an environment where it's okay, because otherwise it happens and then it gets hidden. Completely
human error, right? Most people get something wrong. Like for my one thing that I think most people know me for is AML, but I actually do quite a lot of work in the professional negligence space.
Okay.
I've been working with Lockton for goodness me since I started, and part of the reason that I do what I do, apart from, loving AML, and I do want to stop the baddies. But I do feel really passionately that compliance is about protecting people.
Yes.
And one of the kind of ways in which we fail to protect people is when our clients come to us and then they have to sue us because we've got something wrong. It's the very worst of times for a solicitor or a lawyer to be in that position. One of my things I've always paid attention to is how common is that? I had, back in my legal career when I was a fee earner, I had a number of issues that didn't go to plan, and I had to report them to the insurer. And I remember the first time it happened to me, I just wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. I'm like, oh my God, take the certificate away. I'm not fit to represent anybody. I've let this person down. And I goes down the corridor to see my boss and to tell her about it. And she went, oh, okay, just put it over there with my two. And it was just like a secret. Nobody ever admitted to making mistakes until she did. It's like I got let into this secret club then where it was okay to say you make mistakes. And I was like, oh my God. And anyway, that happened, a couple more times. And, it wasn't I wasn't paying attention, but pressure of work, not knowing how to do things, not feeling able because of the kind of hierarchical nature of moving up through a law ladder. You don't want to put your hand up and say you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And for me, that actually led to me needing quite a lot of time off work and really question whether law was the right place for me because I just felt there was all this pressure. I'm not able to put my hand up and say, I need some help.
It's particularly bad for junior solicitors, isn't it?
It's getting worse, I think. Yeah. I think it's getting worse. There's a law care research that I quote in my book, around 74% or something of lawyers when they surveyed them had experienced stress that affected their mental health within the last 12 months.
I'm almost surprised it's not higher, to be honest.
When I went off, I probably 2004, I was off. Like I say, I had 5 months off and was sick. And when I came back, there was just a procession of people came in to see me.
Really?
Who said, oh, Amy, I'm glad to see you back. I've been on these pills for this long. I've been seeing this therapist for this. No one ever talked about it when I got back. And I kind of made it a bit of a mission since to really talk about mental health in the legal sector, because we need to know it's okay to say, actually, I'm stuck.
Yes.
Actually, I need some help. Actually, I can't do what you've asked me to do. And not feel that that's going to affect your career long term.
And I'm not entirely sure who would lose in that situation. That surely everybody wins in that scenario. There isn't a loser. It's
interesting. I as a result of that situation, I created a lunchtime group, which we called Bring Out Your Dead. It was a Bring Out Your Dead meeting. But basically, all the people, my peers, that were struggling, I'm like, listen, I'm going to get a room. Come along with your files. We'll workshop them together as a group. No one's, there's no stupid question. It's okay to say you don't know anything. And I used to get, it was probably, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 lawyers in my department. I probably get 10 in at every session, bring some files and say, I don't know how to do this. And they would, someone else looking at the problem you're stuck with, you can resolve in like 30 seconds. Like, you just need to explain. They're like, do that. You can go back to your desk, do it. But before that, they had what I call 3 o'clock in the morning files, the ones that wake you up. And when you speak to a group of lawyers, like, does anyone know what a 3 o'clock in the morning file is? They all know. They've all been there at some point. They're the ones that wake you up, bolt upright, and you go, like that. I still have those nightmares. Oh my God, I still have them.
Really?
Yeah, honestly, I have to wake myself up and say, you don't do that anymore, Amy, it's okay. And literally, how long have I not been doing it now? It's 18 years I've been in AML now. And probably 4 weeks ago, I had one of those nightmares where I thought, oh, those files on the bottom shelf there I've not looked at, what's in them, and have a mislimitation and that kind of panic. So when you've had that kind of trauma, it doesn't really leave, and it's so common. Yeah. And that's all about compliance.
I love that idea. They bring out your data. Do any of your clients?
Yeah, I recommend it to quite a few of my clients.
Do they take it up?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, quite a few have taken it up, and they share the learnings. And by being really open about that, I remember getting pulled for it when I'm like, why are you doing this? These people should be going to the supervisors. I'm like, yeah, but they clearly feel that they can't. So there's something not working there. Yeah. Whereas if that's sponsored by the business and it's a safe place, first of all, it's an amazing learning environment for anyone to go to. Just come along and hear. And just by putting the thing on, it delivers that message that it's safe to say you're stuck here. if you don't do that, people will hide stuff. Yeah. People will put them, like I used to put them underneath all the other files I was working on and go, I've never got to that one, that's a problem. And, you know, and then suddenly the time for sorting out's gone. You've missed a key date, you've missed a hearing date or something. And now we're having to make a report to the insurer. And now we're having to tell the client, dear client, I'm really sorry, you might want to sue me.
Yeah.
It's the very worst of days. And so for me, my passion around compliance, all compliance, is about how do we build a framework that means that people don't feel like that. Because, you know, especially these days, the commitment, the financial commitment that is going to be with people who are entering the profession for years. I mean, my student loan lasted long enough, but, you know, that was in the last century. But that now it's a completely different ballgame. The amount of money you've got to put in, the time you've got to invest, how competitive it is, that those people, they're leaving the profession. They're coming, they're going, it's just I can't do it. And they're leaving and we're losing the talent. And that has real implications for the long term of the society we're in. If you can't have people that are passionate about helping you stay in the profession, who are you going to go to? I mean, I always remember when I was a trainee, and kind of this goes back to why it matters, really. I used to run a family clinic, you know, as you do as a trainee. You can run the clinic, see all the possible people, and then if they're good, sign them up, and then we'll pass them on to the solicitor. And I had this guy come in on a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday lunchtime, and he was a bike mechanic, you know, in his overalls, full of oil. And he came and sat down, and I said, how can I help you? And he just practically there and then burst into tears. Big kind of 6'3" guy. And like, what's happened? He said, I was out on Saturday and I got drunk and I snogged this girl and I know I shouldn't have done it. And my wife found out. She's kicked me out and she won't let me see the kids. And I've never missed a bedtime. And he was devastated. And by the time we went, you know, I had a box of tissues. Here you go. Don't worry. This is what we're going to do. And he's like, thank goodness for that. And that really brought home to me, not for the first time, but it's the one I remember, that if he hadn't had a person to come and talk to, what would he have done?
Yeah.
You know, how could he have got the help? You can't get this stuff necessarily. I'm a tech person, right? But you can't get it off a chatbot the same as a human explaining to you, it's going to be okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's one of the things that we don't put enough emphasis on, or we can process away that kind of client care that we're there for. It's a big part of why a lot of us start to be lawyers, and we have to be really careful about making sure we can continue that.
I just wanted to take a moment out to thank our amazing sponsor, the International Compliance Association. The ICA are the leading professional body for the global regulatory and financial crime community, offering professional qualifications, world-class events and training. Go check them out online, and if any of the certificates or courses take your fancy, then you can get 10% discount using our code AJFOX10 at checkout.
And where is the hurdle to allowing a culture where people can feel free to come and talk about those issues and mistakes? Because a culture where it's not allowed won't stop it happening. So what are the concerns that the powers that be in the firms that you work with have, and how do we get past them?
So I think, so the first firm I trained at was not a great example of a law firm. I'll say that now.
Okay.
It was, my training contract was unusual.
Okay.
Put it that way. I was, during my training contract, the first 6 months I sat listening to somebody who's a conveyancing lawyer dictating letters. Wouldn't let me do anything. You just sit there and listen. Okay. Just didn't trust me to do anything. The second 6 months I was in family, a good seat. I did all of the trainee things that you would do, drafting briefs to counsel, attending hearings, all that kind of stuff. The third seat I was in personal injury. When I got to the personal injury department, there was one solicitor who had 6 secretaries and had me as his trainee. Right. And he had 2,000 files. What had happened was there'd been a team, and systematically those people had left, fallen out with the boss, not the lawyer, the boss.
Right.
And had left. And this one lawyer was left kind of holding the baby with 2,000 files. He was a 5-year PQE solicitor. And he
was not sleeping well.
I don't know how he managed it. But essentially for about 2 or 3 months, all I did was pull his post. He had that much post. I just was pulling his post, listening to him dictate, and that's it. Then out of the blue, I got a phone call from the boss. I need you to go and work at the Moston office. Okay. What do they do in the Moston office? Well, they do a family, which I've done a seat in, and they've done litigation. They do kind of trips, slips, landlord and tenant, some car accidents, stuff. He's going to do that. Okay, so he's going to supervise me. Oh, no, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. Okay, how many files are there? 600. This is kind of 6 months before I qualify.
Right.
Probably even longer. I went there and met Joanne. So Joanne works at Teal now. She's our head of the practice, head of our tech. And she was given to me as a secretary. So this guy was leaving, the solicitor that was there. He had 4 days, a 4-day handover with me to tell me about his 600 files. And then I was left on my own in this high street office. And I worked 7 days a week. I would take 6 boxes of files home with me every Friday night and bring 6 tapes of dictation home with me every Monday morning, back with me every Monday morning. I was absolutely nuts. And after 6 months, we survived, Joe and I. we had to learn stuff. The civil procedure rules had just changed. I had a barrister called Bob on speed dial. Bob, what should we do about this? Bob, what should we do about this? He was just brand new. He would go to hearings for me for 50 quid and stuff. It was amazing. And then after 6 months, I got a phone call from the boss. You need to come back to the Hyde office. Why? Well, that solicitor is left. Okay, so you're the only solicitor we've got in litigation. I need to take over his 2,000 files. I said, what about my 600 files? He said, bring them with you. So I ended up with this. I'd qualified by this point. It was about three months PQE, 2,000 files, 2 trainees, 6 secretaries, and carried on for 6 months, managed to. On some of those files, I was the 15th lawyer that had picked it up. No. A car accident, 15th lawyer. It was absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. The only way I could do it was to train all the secretaries to be essentially paralegals, which was well before anyone was doing this. And I started in the law. You had a secretary and you dictated everything and they typed it. And you had trainees that sat listening to you. You didn't leverage, you didn't have the support of the secretaries. You didn't trust them with anything, really, apart from word for word typing what you'd said. I had to throw that out the window. Joe had already, because of the way I work, had already kind of developed those skills working on the family cases for me. So she managed the family cases and I had to train the 5 secretaries to understand what to do until you got an offer from the other side, and then it had to come to me to do the legal work of value in the case. And it was something that my firm, then we went to Pannoni after that. Pannoni adopted that. Joe and I wrote them a white paper saying, this is how you're going to get efficiencies when fixed costs would come in. And so now everybody has that model with paralegals, but I don't say I thought of it on my own. But eventually the industry moved to you can't necessarily have expensive solicitors doing process type legal work. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you all about that is you can imagine the environment we were in. Why would I have stuck out a job with 2,600 files? Why did any of us stick it out? Because he was terrifying. The boss was terrifying. And we really got this sense of whatever money he was spending was coming literally out of his pocket. And one of the challenges you have with the way that the legal sector works is that money really is coming out of the equity partner's pocket.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so why are people scared? Why do people feel they can't speak out? Because there's this probably not purposefully coming down message from this is my money.
Yeah.
This is my money. This isn't about, you know, not that it's just about money, but this kind of the whole 6-minute unit, the whole billing targets, the whole pressure on that and where that all ends up. And it often doesn't feel fair. One of the things that I have identified with problems with culture is where people within the organisation don't think things are fair, then you have less buy-in to the compliance programme. Like, why should I care about them? So this particular boss one day didn't give us all pay rises. No, I've no money to give you a pay rise. And then about 3 weeks later, turned up in a brand new car. Didn't go down well. Hang on a minute. Now, fair enough, you could have been leasing that car, there could have been all kinds of things, but it was the optics of the inequality and the unfairness that really damaged the kind of goodwill within the business. So I do think being really conscious about how messages come down through the business. I mean, I'm not, thank goodness I've never met anyone like my old boss as a client. be really clear about this. But what I have met plenty of times is an example where there's one person, an influencer within the business, that is not complying. Often they can be quite awkward, shouty, scary. And once one person starts to undermine the compliance program, the thing just starts to crumble. Because people think, well, why have I got to do it when they've not got to do it? Yeah. Or that person just recruits other people to just say, I'm not doing it. And that is quite common, especially if they're, big billers. And the inability for firms, or the unwillingness of firms to tackle people who are big billers.
So it almost makes me wonder how much of it's sort of intermeshed with the journey that a normal solicitor has through their career will impact how they then, if they become a partner, Completely. How they'll then treat their compliance team. So it's almost, is it down to people from within compliance to go and get that buy-in? I'm sure it is to a certain extent, but also if they have a better journey.
I am completely convinced that we should include in part of the solicitors or the lawyers, because, there's lots of different types of lawyers now, not necessarily following a traditional training contract route that I did, that there should be some element of exposure to the business services within the business.
Yes, yeah.
Because we don't. And, way back when, you had to do those 3 areas of law and then you pick the 4th area, the one you wanted to qualify into. I've always said, well, not always, but probably for the last 20 years said, if people actually sat and understood what we did in business services, in compliance, which includes conflicts, CDD, credit control, any of these other jobs that we have to do, quality, complaints management, if we understood that and what we were doing, we'd have a much better working relationship. The other thing, and I did speak to one of my clients the other day, said that they're actually going to do this, is a bit of a back to the floor from the senior management, literally coming and seeing how it is.
That sounds like a great idea.
I was speaking to this client the other day, and we were talking about how difficult it is when your experience of work within a law firm, if you're, say, an analyst, is you're not working quickly enough. This isn't quick enough for me. And you get that multiplied by however many grouchy people you got. Now, listen, I've been a lawyer. I know the pressure to get your file open and move for that client and get on with it, and you want to be able to demonstrate that. It's high-stakes stuff that you set off that relationship with your client well. They know that you're proactive and you're on it. And so engaging with a central business acceptance team or something can feel like a hurdle to get over. And you can get quite frustrated if you don't understand what they're doing,
It's so true. We're always hearing from our clients when they're hiring people into their risk and compliance teams that they need people who are able to demonstrate empathy and understand the pressures on the lawyers. It's interesting to think about it from the other perspective. Is any time given for lawyers to go and understand the pressures on the risk and compliance team? I've never
that's what we were
such
discussing.
a great idea. Yeah,
that's what we were discussing. I said to her, what I've always recommended, and I do think that we should get a back to the floor. That program used to be on Channel 4. When you go and do the job.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's great. So basically, or like Undercover Boss.
Okay,
you basically go and do all the jobs,
right?
And then you realise where the real problems are, because you can get so far away from them, massively far away from them. I've always been a massive fan of really understanding everybody's job in the business. There's no job in Teal, for example, that I haven't done or wouldn't do myself, and I wouldn't ask anyone to do anything I wouldn't do myself. I think that's really important to keep in touch with that and make sure you're understanding what the pressures are that those people have got. And think about larger law firms. I remember the very real difference when I was at Pannonia. I did graduate recruitment, part of my learning and development role. And I remember my experience of trying to get into the law with undiagnosed dyslexia, really difficult childhood with a mum who had bipolar, not great, school kind of gave up on me, so not the sports school, a 2-2 from a former polytechnic, and then trying to apply for training contracts and getting nowhere. And that's how I ended up in this really great place with the 2,600 files. But I had to take the paralegal route in, paid me £4,000 a year for the first year because it was before, so we could get out of the Law Society minimum at the time. I mean, all the signs were there. I should have run a mile. And then I went to work at a really great firm, prestigious firm in Manchester, great attitude to people, and saw how graduate recruitment worked there. It was, you probably were seeing people with, certainly back in those days, we'd had so many applicants, you had to have some sort of sifting criteria. And back in those days, it was quite common for it to be on A-level results or even GCSE and A-level results, predicted 2-1 from, a good university. And then coming into that role and the difference, the training contract I had with literally rolling my sleeves up and, getting stuck in to quite a nice experience of a program designed for you, work that's a structure to it. But what sometimes those people didn't get in that other route was the exposure to the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah.
And how really difficult it is. You were probably, 2 or 3 years qualified before you had your own clients and those pressures of your own.
Yeah.
I think there's sometimes some element of not actually realising what else is going on in the business and how difficult it is. So yeah, I definitely think that we should be coming back to understanding those roles, especially if we've never kind of worked our way up through the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on a slightly different note, but we spend a lot of time speaking to people who might have training contracts lined up, and sometimes they're looking for different types of work, and some of that is risk and compliance. But I'll always say to them, they're often getting pestered to go and do a paralegal role, but they've got their training contract lined up. I'll always say, look, now is the time. You can see the business from a different perspective. So get into risk and compliance, or get into the marketing team, get into the BD team, any team within business services that is giving you an insight into the working operations of it as a business, as opposed to, just the fee earning side.
Completely. I mean, the other thing is, if we think about progression as a compliance, I'm really passionate about compliance being a good and an alternative career path for somebody who's finished their legal education and wants other options.
Yeah.
They couldn't find an area of law. I mean, I would never. There are people out there who specialise in AML. I would never have taken that path as a solicitor.
Right.
But I am as experienced and understand the law to the same level as someone working in a regulatory team in a law firm. I just never got that opportunity and was never going to do that. But I always wanted, that kind of intellectual activity of taking a piece of law and figuring out how it works, but a different path. I didn't want to be fee earning necessarily, didn't want 6-minute units and things like that. So I think we need to create, and we've talked about this for years now, there needs to be a really credible career path for people. But one of the things that you need to progress through a career path in compliance is the exposure to the skills that you need, the influencing skills that you need, that you do get quite often on a traditional lawyer path. You get your own clients, you've got to figure out how to deal with them. You're in a team, you might become a people manager of other people. You then in a partnership with other people. You've got to learn all these influencing skills. And the opportunities to get those skills for most people who start off in a career in compliance can be quite limited.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be deliberate about giving people those skills. We do have lawyers and some fantastic people in the compliance space that have been fee earning lawyers that have kind of had that development and then come over and can do the influencing. It can be quite difficult to access that kind of experience. And I think that those of us that are leaders in compliance, those of us that are more senior in compliance, hopefully we'll all get together and think we need to think about this, and we need to think about how do we give people these skills, because they're not easy to pick up.
No, and we hear so little from firms investing in that sort of education. They'll invest in technical education, but in terms of softer skill sets, we just rarely hear about it. And I think for a lot of the clients we work with or the firms we come across, it feels, and I guess understandably because it's a relatively new space still, a lot of the recruitment is still quite reactive to a need, and there hasn't necessarily been huge amounts of consideration to, is there a way this person could be with us for 10, 15 years? Even if they're not going to be, you would like to think you would be able to create a pathway that included training and education. But yeah, we don't see many firms embracing it.
I think you see what I see, which is I see people get to a certain level within it, not necessarily the very largest firms, but kind of the larger local firms to the national firms. You'll get somebody there who has reached a point and their boss isn't moving anytime soon. So they have to move because there isn't that progression, there isn't that succession planning, there aren't those opportunities. And so they move. And that always will be a challenge, going back to my earlier point about in compliance at work, it's about capacity. Resourcing is always challenging. And so, unlike the kind of traditional lawyer path, good news, if you've got someone coming up and they get good, you just find them more clients, you make more money. It doesn't work like that in risk and compliance. You've got one limited budget. You've got to make it stretch. And so what I do see people get to a certain level and they're moving not because they don't like the firm that they're in, just because they can see that there's nothing there for them. And at Teal, we sometimes pick up people who are at that stage and they're looking for something different because they just know that they can't get past that. And it goes to my earlier point. The reason I left private practice and working in compliance in private practice was I couldn't say I could get the progression that I wanted because the paths are just not there.
Yeah.
So I do think we need to think about it and start to create a route to something. Whether people, it's interesting. I asked my team, how interested are you in whether what we do could qualify for SQE? Actually, they weren't that interested. I was quite surprised. I was like, because when they've been working in law firms, they've often felt, or people can feel that, they're just kind of not regarded the same as somebody who is a solicitor or is fee earning. And I was just, curious about it because I do have some of us are solicitors, some of them not. And the feedback was, actually, we don't mind. We've got a fulfilling job. That's more important to us, actually, than having a badge. And I think that's an interesting development.
Definitely.
Because I just don't think 20 years ago it was like that. You made that investment in law school and to get that badge solicitor and then go on. And what's interesting, speaking to certainly the younger members of my team, is what's more important to them is that they have a great experience on a day-to-day, that they feel that they're progressing and that they feel that they're making a difference and that there's an input, it's relevant what they're doing. And I think for me, in being a business owner, that's something I'm really conscious of. What does it feel like to work here? Are we giving you what you want? Yeah. And I talk to a lot of people that are managers in the space. A lot of my clients are people managers. And this kind of step change in people wanting to have this kind of work-life balance, wanting to have a purpose. I think that's a real big thing. People want their life to have a purpose. And sometimes question if it does. Is the job that I've got, does it matter? Yeah. Especially when the feedback you get from the business sometimes is, you're not working quick enough, this is not good enough all the time. I can see why people get quite disillusioned by that. Definitely. But compliance is so important. I would say that, wouldn't I? But it is so important because that's where you do things like manage capacity. Compliance, you're supposed to be measuring what people can actually do. Are they actually doing what's possible? Are we asking of them things that are possible or not? Because if we're not asking things that are possible of them, they're going to end up burnt out. They're going to end up with stress. We're going to end up with claims. So compliance, having a policy that says this is how many files a person can manage and then monitoring that through a control framework. Yeah. This is how you keep people safe. It's I would say this, but I think it's one of the most important functions in the business because it's protecting the business. It's not business prevention, it's business protection. Yeah. And that has a purpose. And I sometimes wonder how much that's surfaced with people when they go into compliance roles, how really important it is.
It's one of the main things I've definitely taken from today, this, talking about the control framework, we are seeing firms invest in more internal audit and more of this, but it feels like it's at its infancy. It feels as if you seriously buy into risk and compliance as a firm, then you have to be measuring, how well the team is doing. And I'm sure that filters back down to how people feel, whether they're having an impact. If it's not being measured, do you feel like your impact is being valued in the same way? But that has been so interesting and so much valuable information out there. We normally ask at the end if you've got any advice for people maybe getting into this space. But I think maybe looking at it from a different angle, maybe ask if there was sort of one thing that you might want a firm or a partnership thinking about wanting to take their risk and compliance function to the next level, what would it be?
I would ask them to go and work out how people are breaking their policies and procedures. That's what I would do because a lot of the time you speak to people and they know it's not working, like I said to you at the very beginning, right? Despite how much money I spend, they're not listening to me. Go and figure out why that is. Because they're actually usually genuine reasons why they can't comply. Rarely do you get people who just go, I'm not doing that. You do sometimes. You do sometimes. But generally, when people aren't complying and your program isn't working, there's another reason. Often pressure on billing means that like archiving. It's an in-joke in the legal sector. How's your archiving? I'll get around to it at some point. Right. Because like, archiving happens after you're not earning anymore. And because you're not earning anymore, there's no priority to do it. Yeah. So archiving, which is a really important function, if you don't archive, you can't measure someone's capacity properly. If you can't measure the capacity properly, you can't make sure they've got enough work for the business to survive, or not too much work that they can't survive. Go and sit in the seat. Go and speak to people. Speak to secretaries and support staff, because they're the ones that tell me what it's really like when I go and audit. Give them the opportunity to tell you why it's not working. Make it a safe place for them to say why it's not working, and then you'll figure out why it's not working, and then you'll know how to fix it. Amazing.
Well, look, Amy, this has been fantastic. I could sit here and speak to you for hours. We might end up calling this part 1 and getting you back in. And thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
We really hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you did, please do us a huge, huge favour and share it with a friend or a colleague. The more people we can get listening, the more time and energy we can get into recording more episodes and getting the best guests and the most interesting stories and insights. I want to say a huge thank you to the ICA for their support, to Ty and Karem here in the studio, and a massive thanks to Kat for making sure everything runs so smoothly behind the scenes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on LinkedIn to make sure you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening.